Hi everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we learned about how state variable can cause unnecessary re-renders, and we also learned how we can minimize those re-renders and make our application more performant. In this video, we are going to learn a new hook, that is useEffect hook, and we are also going to learn how we can use this useEffect hook to fetch data from the backend. So let us go to our code, and this is the code of our counter component, and in this counter component we are going to fetch data from the backend. You might be wondering why we are using this counter component. So the answer is simple. I want to show you something. That is why we are using this counter component to fetch data. Now I hope you remember how to fetch data in JavaScript. So let us write a function that fetches the data from the backend. So let us write a function const fetch movies data, and it is an async function that fetches the data. So how do we fetch data in JavaScript? So we write const, let's say response, and we'll do await fetch and the endpoint that we want to hit. So I don't have a real endpoint, so let's write some gibberish over here. Now what we do, we convert this response to JSON format. So how do we convert? Let's write const JSON is equals to await response dot JSON. So we converted this response to a JSON format, and then we return this JSON object. But we don't have a real endpoint, so let's return an array of movies. So let's write the name of the movie. So which movie I want to get? Let's say I want to get this Dune movie, and let's write another movie name. Let's say Dune Part 2, and let's write another movie. Let's say, okay, why I am not able to think of a movie name. So let's write any movie. Let's write this movie ABC. I don't know if this movie exists or not, but yeah. So let's comment this two things. So let's comment this two lines of code, because we are not actually fetching data from the backend, but yeah, we are kind of faking it. So we have a function called fetch movies data. It fetches the movie and it returns an array that contains, right now it contains the name of movie, but when we use a real endpoint, then we will get a lot of attributes like the poster, description, date of release, the length of the movie, etc. Okay, but for now this is enough for us to learn about the useEffect hook. And now we are going to call this function and get our data. Let me also do, let me store this in a variable called data, and let me console log this data. So we'll see that we are getting the data. So if you see over here in our application, this, we are getting a state fulfilled, and we are getting an array that contains our movies Dune 2 ABC. Yeah, so we are getting it. So far it looks correct. You might be wondering, okay, so this is how we fetch data in React. Let me show you something. Okay, let me show you something. So when I'm clicking on this increase button, we are fetching the data again and again. See, this counter component re-renders, and when it re-renders, it kind of calls this, not kind of, it calls the function and gets the data every time this counter component is getting re-rendered, and this is a problem. So to solve this problem, we don't want this fetch movie data to call every re-render. Okay, so we want to call it in the first render, and then afterwards we don't want to call this function. So how do we solve this issue? So to solve this issue, we have another hook. We call it useEffect hook. So let me import useEffect hook. It is getting imported from this React library, and let me show you the syntax of this useEffect hook. So how do we use this useEffect hook? So first we write useEffect. It is a function, and it takes two argument. It takes a callback function and it also takes an array of dependency. Here you can see react dot effect callback and you can see a react dot dependency list. So it takes a callback function. So let me write this callback function, and it also takes an array. Okay, so it also takes an array. So it takes two arguments. The first argument is a callback function, and this callback function is known as effect function. So let me write effect function. So the function that we use inside useEffect hook is called effect function. So effect function, and this is an array. So basically this array is optional. We will discuss about this in just a moment, but let me first complete this. So we have this useEffect hook. It takes two arguments. The first one is an effect function, or we can call it a callback function, and then second is an dependency array. This array or array is optional. Instead of calling this function over here, let me call it inside this useEffect hook. Okay, so now let's clean this. So now let's clean our console and let me refresh this. So first you see this app, our app component is getting re-rendered, our nav bar, search bar, everything is getting rendered for the first time. But when I click on this increase button, it will re-render this counter component. So I'm clicking on this. So you see this counter component is getting re-rendered, but this function is not getting called. So this is how we use useEffect hook to get or to fetch data from the backend. So what is this dependency array? So this dependency array right now it is empty. What does it mean? If the dependency array is empty, that means this function, this callback function or this effect function will get called only for the first render. After that it will not get called. It is getting called for the first render, and after this first render it is not getting called. So if this dependency array is empty, that means this function, this callback function will get called once. If I pass something over here, let's say I am passing this counter variable over here, that's whenever the value of this counter changes, call this callback function or call this effect function. So since I passed counter over here and now I am increasing the value of counter, let me show you. Now I am increasing the value of counter and you see the counter component getting re-rendered, and after that this callback function is also getting called. So if you pass a dependency over here, that means whenever this dependency changes, call this function. And if you don't pass anything, if you pass an empty array, that means only call this function, this callback function, for the first time, for the first render. After that this callback function will not get called. What if I don't pass this array? So if I don't pass this array, like I said, this array was optional. So if I don't pass this array, that means call this function, call this callback function or call this effect function every time this component re-renders. That means whenever this component re-renders, call this function. So let me show you. When I click on this button, this component re-renders, it is getting re-rendered and this function is also getting called. So if I have this empty array, that means this callback function will get called only one time. If I pass a dependency over here, that means whenever this dependency changes, call this function. And if I don't pass this array, that means call this function, call this callback function every time this component re-renders. So this is all about useEffect hook. We use this useEffect hook to fetch data from the backend. We also use this useEffect hook in other places that we will discuss in our later videos. But for now, if I want to fetch data from the backend, how do I fetch data from the backend? First, I write a callback function and then I pass an empty dependency array. So whenever you want to fetch data from the backend, then you have to fetch it inside this useEffect hook. Okay, and I think we are ready to build our application now. So in the next video, we are going to build this movie component in which we are going to render, we are going to show real movies. So get ready to build this movie component in the next video. So this is it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Thank you.